coming today. I'm A.G. Harmon, and thank you. I want to thank you again for attending this second of our presentations in the Student Scholar Series, instituted 8 years ago in order to recognize notable legal scholarship produced by members of the student body during the previous academic year, and to foster skills associated with presenting and defending that scholarship in a conference-style setting. Today's presentation will be made by third-year student Molly O'Connor. Before I introduce Molly, I'd like to first introduce the respondent to her presentation, Rosemary Harold, who is an adjunct professor here. She joined Wilkinson, Barker, and Nauer, is that correct, Rosemary? LLP as a partner in 2011, specializing in media, broadband, and First Amendment issues. She advises a wide range of clients, including commercial and non-commercial broadcasters, cable operators, video programmers, wireless providers, and satellite operators on legal, regulatory, and policy matters. Her work includes representation of clients in major rulemaking transactions, both large and small, and regulatory compliance counseling. From 2005 to 2011, Ms. Harold served as the FCC, served at the FCC, and most recently as legal advisor to Commissioner Robert McDowell for media and broadband issues, with a particular focus on First Amendment concerns. She earlier served as the deputy chief of the FCC's Media Bureau, where she led the staff teams working on major rulemaking such as video franchising reform and media ownership, and on major transactional reviews such as the Sirius XM merger. She began her career as a journalist, including as a reporter and bureau chief for the Miami Herald and editor of C-SPAN, and was editor of the ABA Student Lawyer magazine, a columnist for that. So we thank her for being with us here today. Now let me introduce today's student scholar, Molly O'Connor, third year here at the Columbus School of Law, originally from Rockville, Maryland. Molly attended the College of Worcester in Worcester, Ohio for undergraduate studies, majoring in communications. After working as a legal secretary and paralegal at a medical malpractice law firm, she decided to attend law school. Her undergraduate degree in communications led her to pursue a certificate with the Law and Technology Institute at CUA. She currently serves as a production editor for the Journal of Law and Technology. She's previously interned in different bureaus and offices at the FCC for 3 semesters at the National Association of Broadcasters. Her interest in the topic, in fact, that she's going to speak on today was a project that she undertook while as an intern with the FCC last fall. And that interest turned into the article and the subject of her work today, which is entitled Carte Channels, Big Ideas Take Some Getting Used To. So I'll turn things over to Molly. Thank you, Molly.
Hi, everyone. Can everyone hear me? We're good? Okay. As Professor Harmon mentioned, my name is Molly O'Connor, and I'm here to present my note that I wrote regarding a Federal Communications Commission's proposed rule to address online video distributors, and specifically what that proposal means in the grander scheme of our society's communications laws, and the IP transition that we're currently going through. Now, before you go on, you may notice that the title of my note contains 2 terms that may not be everyday terms to everyone: MVPDs and a la carte channels. Big ideas take some getting used to. These are both terms regarding how we receive our video programming, how we receive our YouTube and all the videos that come over cable. Before getting to more formal explanations of those terms, I was hoping to start with a quick introduction as to where our communications landscape stands today. And while I could stand here and run through a complete timeline, I thought a BMW commercial from this last year's Super Bowl actually better exemplified how our communications are working right now, and the phenomena with which we are faced.
Back on 56 pass, I wasn't prepared to translate that. That's a mark with the A and then the ring around it? At? See, that's what I said. The case is spelled as about. Yeah. But I've never heard it said. I see the mark. There it is. At AM feedback, com. I mean, what is internet anyway? What do you write to it like mail?
There's Allison. Can you explain what internet is?
See, that's what I said. What do you mean there's nothing under the hood? Katie said she thought this was a car.
Yeah.
And it's built using wind? Like from a windmill?
Or a fan, or a turbine, or a fan line.
I mean, what is I3 anyway?
Allison, can you explain what I3 is?
The all-electric BMW i.
So as you can see, this BMW commercial implies that our society may be used to a car without an engine in the future in the same way that our society right now is used to the internet. However, here lies the issue. Our current communications laws do not reflect an understanding of being used to the internet. In fact, the internet is barely addressed in the current laws, and we're being asked to fit it in within our current regulations and laws. 2 years after the airing of this clip from the Today Show, which was taken from 1994, you may have noticed, Congress passed the laws that currently hold as our nation's laws over the internet and the rest of the communications. Just to put it in more perspective, at the time that this 1996 Act was being drafted, America Online began providing dial-up internet. And a year after it was enacted, in 1997, Google was created. So as shown by this commercial, and as you can see, our understanding of the internet has grown exponentially since, and the statutory and regulatory structure should reflect that understanding. Now, I know I said I wouldn't go through a timeline of our nation's laws regarding communications, but I thought that a general background may be helpful. Congress created the FCC through the Communications Act of 1934. This designated it as our independent agency, our experts in communications by wire and radio. Today, the FCC's authority extends over not only wire and radio, but also television, satellite, and cable. Now, the next 3 blocks that you see on the screen are possibly the regulation and deregulation that the FCC and Congress are seeking to avoid by not addressing the internet directly. In the 1980s and the 1990s, we saw a growth of the cable industry and the rapid growth that could be compared to what we've seen in the internet in the recent past. Now, in 1984, Congress passed the Cable Communications Policy Act. By doing this, they were putting in place public policy to address the, at that time, infant cable industry. 8 years later, Congress came back in 1992 and passed the Cable Act, which regulated the rates of the cable industry in response to rising cable rates. However, in 1996, cable came back and reversed itself by deregulating the cable industry and giving the power back to the cable provider. Now, I wanted to make 2 notes in this. The first is that it's worth noting that part of the back and forth motion of the act is due to the political shift in office. Republicans tend to take a more hands-off approach and don't want to regulate, and while Democrats they are pro-regulation. The second thing worth noting is that at no point am I trying to argue that in 1996 Congress should have done anything about the internet. It was way too young at that point, and there was no way for us to really predict what has since happened. However, as I mentioned, 1996 was the last major movement that we saw from Congress, and yet the FCC, its expert in the field, has time and time again been asked to handle the internet within our regulations. So which brings us to the underlying issue. The internet is taking over. We all have our smartphones, laptops, and I'm connected to the internet right now, as I showed you a video clip. And our regulators are repeatedly being asked to address these new technologies and innovations as they compete with these older regulated technologies. And they're doing this without the statutory guidance to do so. The one thing you may notice in this presentation is that it's a comment on just one aspect of how I believe that the current laws of our communications need to be rewritten, or, depending how you look at it, written in the first place. I believe that these issues are going to keep popping up over and over again as new technologies are created. In just the recent past, we've seen the open internet debate. I wrote this on an NPRM that was released in December of 2014. Last month, the FCC released another notice of proposed rulemaking regarding a very similar issue. We're going to see these coming up more and more as the internet continues to rise. As I mentioned, I wrote this article regarding an FCC proposal to modernize its definition of multi-channel video programming distributor, or MVPD, as you saw in the title. These are historically the cable companies, satellite providers, and phone companies that offer our video programming. FCC is proposing to modernize its definition to include within scopes within its scope, video programmers, regardless of what technology it uses to distribute it. Just to take a look at the current proposal, it reads, a person such as, but not limited to, a cable provider, a multi-channel, multi-point distribution service, a direct broadcast satellite service, or a television receive-only satellite program distributor, who makes available for purchase by subscribers or customers multiple channels of video programming. Now, by opening, this comes on the heels of 2 cases that involve online video distributors seeking the status of an MVPD, despite their online video, delivery mechanism. Aereo and Sky Angel are 2 online distributors. Aereo was essentially a rebroadcasting service that allowed people to watch live over-the-air programming, such as CBS or other channels like that, for a fee. Sky Angel, on the other hand, was an internet protocol, an IP television-based platform that primarily consisted of faith-based programming. However, it expanded to cover things such as C-SPAN or Discovery Channel. Now, both of these entities provided to their subscribers for a fee multiple channels of video programming. The big difference was that they were doing it over the open internet. They did not own the facilities by which they transmitted these services to their subscribers. And so cable companies and other providers as such took issue with this as they were trying to receive certain benefits and obligations that come along with this MVPD status. MVPD status comes along with a number of regulatory privileges and obligations, including the right to seek relief under the program access rules and good faith negotiation for retransmission consent. Now, these 2 companies were trying to seek those benefits by using the internet. So the FCC looked at their definition, and they are proposing to redefine it in order to make it technology neutral, in order to incorporate these technologies. And by doing this, and this is a quote from Tom Wheeler, the FCC chairman, he said, the FCC is taking a first step to open access to cable programs as well as local television. The result should be to give consumers more alternatives from which to choose so they can buy the programs that they want. Now, this all depended on the definition of channels. This is the channel defined in the 1996 Act, a portion of the electromagnetic frequency spectrum which is used in a cable system and which is capable of delivering a television channel. The FCC sees 2 different interpretations of this. One is that this definition in particular excludes internet TV because it requires the channel to be in the cable system. Therefore, they see 2 separate interpretations. The first of which is the transmission path interpretation that I just discussed. These are channels that are required to have a program distributor to control its own path, to have the facilities by which they transmit their programming to their subscribers. On the other hand, the FCC is proposing to open up this definition in order to include the internet. In doing this, they have determined the linear programming interpretation. These are channels of pre-scheduled streams of video programming without regard to whether the same entity is also providing the transmission path. Like I said, it's opening it up so that no longer have to own the facilities by which they transmit these, the programs. This includes Aereo and Sky Angel. However, notably, this proposal only applies to subscription linear video services. In other words, the pre-scheduled programming that you see on your television. And as Tom Wheeler explained, this was to give consumers more choices, more alternatives. However, the alternatives that our society are looking to are not included within the subscription linear video services. In fact, these are not the main competitors of cable. As you can see, these are the different categories of internet-based video offerings. The very first one is the one they are considering, Aereo and Sky Angel. These are continuous pre-scheduled programs available for purchase. You may look down the list and notice that things such as Hulu, Netflix, which are really on the rise, are not included in this definition. So the big competitors to cable and this intention to give consumers more the alternatives that they want are not even being addressed in this NPRM. So it's not quite the big step that they're claiming it to be. Second, these categories of internet-based, excuse me. Which brings me to the fact that we are seeing a rise in internet TV. There's been a decline in pay TV subscribers, and a rise in what we call cord cutters. These are people who choose to do away with their cable subscriptions in favor of a broadband-only option, aka the Netflix or other online options. As a result, you can see this one number in the third quarter of last year. The top pay TV providers lost almost 200,000 subscribers. And on the other hand, the top internet service providers gained 3 times that amount. So as you can see, and the cable subscription fees are rising. So we're moving towards this way of looking for ways to cut our costs and these less costly options. And therefore, the trend is towards internet TV and the IP protocol that I was discussing earlier. One of the oldest alternatives to this pay TV subscription is the idea of a la carte television. These are standalone channels that are sold for purchase on their own. That way you would be able to buy CBS by itself. This idea comes from the fact that people don't enjoy the idea of a bundle. You are getting hundreds of channels that are packaged together. However, you don't watch all of them. People on average only watch about 17 channels out of the hundreds that they're getting. Therefore, providers, while they're able to pair their lesser-known channels with the bigger ones, it's good for them and the cable company because they're able to give out more and therefore charge more. The consumer is not as happy. And before, we didn't see any reality of anyone moving away from the tier because there was no other way to get it. However, the internet has been able to provide a platform from which these a la carte channels are really able to take form. Notably, CBS, as I mentioned, has been one of the first to move. They've created this CBS All Access, and this actually fits in within 2 of the definitions. They provide subscription linear services in which you can watch their live CBS broadcasts from your area. On the other hand, you also have a subscription on demand option to watch some of their programs on demand. CBS does Big Bang Theory and the NCISs. These are extremely popular shows. They have a lot of leverage. And furthermore, they're avoiding this MVPD status because it's just one single channel. It's not the multiple channels that they're streaming. This points to the fact that this is another way in which people can get their programming without subscribing to pay TV providers. And additionally, a way in which internet-based services do not fit into the MVPD definition that they're suggesting. By going out on its own, CBS has avoided those MVPD obligations. Additionally, the internet offerings that do fit into the definition, the FCC has recognized that not all of its benefits or obligations apply to these internet entities, these services, and therefore they need to ask for waivers. Therefore, there's a whole nother side of this administrative burden asking the FCC to apply this blanket term to something it doesn't really fit. By attempting to apply these older definitions to this new industry, they're not only causing companies to somewhat mold their offerings to either get the MVP status or get away from it, they're forcing that administrative burden. Therefore, my recommendation is that I think that there's a bigger issue. I think that the internet is a whole new industry, and it should be treated as such. I think that over 20 years is far too long without any mention of the fact that the internet has completely taken over. And I think the only option left is for congressional movement to address the internet and recognize the difference between MVPDs and these online service options. And they need to do this before companies such as CBS are able to mold their offerings in order to kind of get around these regulations and laws. And as a result, the cable industry is being affected by this. This points to a need for separate statutory definitions to address the entirely different industry. Therefore, I think we need to keep the old multi-channel video programming distributors as it applies to the video programming distributors that it mentioned in the definition. However, I think that there needs to be a whole nother definition applied to this online video programming distributors, as I mentioned those categories above, in order to recognize that these internet-based distributors are different and those benefits and obligations do not apply. They need to have their own set of obligations and privileges that we now know after 20 years addressed in our regulation in order to give the FCC that authority to deal with what realistically is getting put onto their plate. That being said, the internet has done great things without any government interaction. So anything that is done needs to be somewhat light-handed. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Rosemary, I'll have you do the response now.
Okay, and now for the fun part. Molly and I were actually on the phone last night late because I was teaching class here, talking over some of the issues. She has picked, as I mentioned out when we were getting our lunch, she's picked an area that is, it's like a regulatory lasagna. It has many layers that have grown up over time, same themes running through things for the last 20 years, but different technologies and different terminology even for the new issues. So as Molly mentioned, one of the proceedings that got her interested in this topic in the first place is actually one that we are using in our class this year, as Ryan and Sylvia could tell you, the MVPD definition docket. How does it fit or not fit online internet video distributors who don't own their own systems? And although Molly didn't get into it, there's lots of obligations and some benefits to that status. And while there was a flurry of comment in the docket once the commission opened it about a year and a half ago, maybe a little bit less, it doesn't seem to be moving right now. And it's hard to figure out maybe why that would be, except that some folks that the commission thought might actually benefit from and welcome the chance to take on that regulatory label and get the benefits from it, like Amazon, for example, went in and said, please don't do this to us. So Molly, why would somebody who is an online video distributor not want to be an MVPD or become a direct FCC regulatee?
One of the things was that Amazon, I know, has discussed is the dynamic between the cable industry and the internet service providers, specifically the fact that what this would potentially do is require these cable providers to give out all these licenses to internet service providers or programming providers such as Amazon. Furthermore, Amazon is kind of one of the sorry, let me just look back one moment. They believe that this provides more ambiguity in the language of the definition. Definition does not fit to internet. In fact, a lot of these obligations and benefits, which I did not go into due to time, don't really apply to these internet programming distributors. And it creates this idea that doesn't cover the certain internet trends like we've seen, such as binge watching. Does that fit into this linear programming? Because it is pre-scheduled, it's all there, but it's on demand also. So they're basically, Amazon was kind of saying that they're molding their offerings in order to avoid this regulation as opposed to just innovating and letting it move and getting the best option to the consumer. So.
Yeah, so I'm the government and I'm your friend doesn't always persuade people to change their status. Well, given that things are in so much flux as far as the online video world, Molly, does the MVPD definition docket, is it irrelevant now? Does anybody care about Aereo-like or Sky Angel-like services? It seems to me, maybe just anecdotally, that folks prefer to go to an outlet, for lack of a better word, an Amazon, a Hulu, whatever, and either download a movie or individual program or maybe program series. That's almost more like going to a library and getting a book. Maybe that's where we're going with this online world, as opposed to the old cable model that then morphed into also satellite TV and telco TV. What do you think? Is this irrelevant?
Not completely. Obviously, the cable and broadcast television holds certain things that are very popular, such as live sports and any live event. That's one thing that they've really fought against these internet providers, because most of the time these internet providers are giving out these on-demand options. And yes, binge watching has been the trend, so that is something that we've become a society that wants it all right now. But there are the certain things that they're seeking to maintain in their box in this cable industry, which I don't necessarily see extending into this on-demand library, taking a book out of a library idea. So I don't think it's completely irrelevant, but I think we are trending away from it for the most part, specifically in regards to like any television show you guys watch. So
The biggest and most contentious rulemaking effort the Commission has engaged in recent memory is net neutrality. And the Commission's had a shot at what it calls open internet rules now a couple times. The current version of the rules went all the way from trying to thread a path between not quite common carriage like old telephony, but somewhat regulated. The Commission's tried that twice before, had things thrown back in their face by courts saying you don't have a basis for doing this, essentially, on the way the statute's written. So now the Commission's gone all the way and declared that what they call broadband internet access service, what you and I would know as our broadband connections at home, is a common carriage service, and yet they've exempted a lot of stuff because, as you said, it doesn't fit. How does the net neutrality concept and regulation, to the degree that it exists now, affect online video? And should that be part of a revision of your paper?
yes, it should.
Leading question.
The Open Internet Order is a very large order, very huge proceeding, as I'm sure you all have heard of it. But what it really does is it protects some of these online providers, such as Netflix. It kind of puts them on an even keel, as opposed to the people who actually are able to, the people who own not only cable, but internet, the Comcast, the Verizons. It kind of prevents them from putting down the little man and keeping them honest, pretty much. So I do think it will have a huge say in internet service, internet options and offerings, because it's trying to make sure that those internet offerings, even if they're separate from cable or any other method or medium, are able to stand and able to come into the landscape on an even keel.
Let me ask you, and I know that your paper hasn't really gotten into a lot of details yet about under your proposed statutory definitions or redefinitions, MVPDs have a number of privileges and obligations. You're calling for some privileges and obligations for OVPDs. Is it correct to assume that you see MVPDs as having a heavier regulatory burden, leaving in place most of the stuff that they have to grapple with right now? Where I'm leading you to, actually, and not very successfully, is the FCC. One of the FCC's goals almost always is to try to level the playing field with respect to regulatory burdens. You want to not put a thumb on the scale as the government for one business model versus another business model. So I'm wondering, do you see a reason for there to be different privileges and obligations? And if you think that there should be light-handed regulations on online providers, shouldn't existing MVPDs, your local cable company or whatever, just be able to switch themselves over to the lighter touch online provider regulatory bundle of stuff? It's all IP-enabled transmission now anyway. What's the difference?
Sorry, can you ask the actual
Sure.
question
So
part of that one more
regulatory
time?
burdens,
Right.
Level playing field, is that important? And if it is important, and if OVPDs have fewer burdens in particular, is there any issue with having current cable operators, satellite TV operators, say, we're walking away from these old regulations. We look just like the guys who are online. So we're dropping those regulations. We're not going to do accessibility stuff anymore. We're not going to do least access stuff anymore. We're not going to deal with local franchise authorities anymore. We're not going to pay franchise fees anymore to local authorities or state authorities because my competitor doesn't have to do it. Why do I have to do it?
I mean, partially that's what I was getting at with looking at the different acts and how we got to the act that we're at today. Clearly there was some wavering in terms of how we reached the right regulations for cable. That being said, they took the time to do so, and they went through it. They have yet to do that with the internet. So I'm not sure if I mean necessarily lesser or completely different burdens, but tailored burdens and tailored obligations that are actually written for the purpose of this new industry, which has taken off and not actually been addressed.
Have you thought about, and it's teed up in the MVPD definition, NPRM, how many letters, acronyms can I use in one clause? The Commission's proposal that doesn't seem to be going very far right now to redefine what multi-channel video programming distributors are, in case you were wondering what MVPD means. They understood that state and local regulators have an interest and have been regulating cable in particular for years, and that it might be difficult to change regulations in a way that would let existing cable operators in particular to skate away from, paying franchise fees that states and cities have come to be very dependent on. What kind of political reality issues like that do you see in Congress trying to move forward to update the statute to deal with online video? What kind of challenges, practical and political challenges, do you think your proposal faces?
One of them being that it would be much harder to define jurisdictional boundaries for the internet. That is not as easy in terms of, as I mentioned, cable companies own the facilities. Those are all very easy to kind of put within jurisdictional boundaries. Internet's a little bit broader. That really crosses boundaries. So it's a little bit more difficult to pinpoint where exactly we would start or break up. So I think that would be one huge burden to kind of jump.
It means all the authority would move to the feds. I'm not sure that people over in the portals buildings where the FCC is would necessarily find that to be a bad thing, but it might be tough to get through Congress.
Right.
So I'm happy to, turn the floor open to questions.
I actually had a question, maybe to you and maybe to the speaker as well to respond. And this is really out of ignorance. But could you suggest that the FCC's desires have an equal
Level playing field
or
is usually the term.
record, but would that be what I'm trying to be clear about? Is that an equal level playing field for the regulated, or is that for the consumer? That is to say, like back when the old days of landline, they had special rules for rural, which made things easier. And they did it because they wanted to level up the consumers. So not because they were worried about leveling up the different forms of regulated businesses. And I think it's even similar with even when cable first came on, when they had certain suggestions of modifying what is the whole municipal law debate of what modify means. But the question of this cable the same as separate from regular TV. So is it the consumer that the FCC is focusing on, or is it the equal for the businesses?
I think there's actually two concepts in your question, so let me address them in turn. The one, when I use the term level playing field among competitors in multi-channel video services, that definitely means the FCC tries in order to enhance competition and let companies compete for customers in the marketplace, tries whenever it can, or at least that's the goal, to make sure that the regulatory burdens in particular on different types of companies are not significantly different. You don't regulate the cable companies a whole lot heavier than you do satellite TV companies, although frankly that's not exactly correct, but that's the goal generally. And the goal is not to, at least the way I thought of it at the commission, and I think most people, when I was there, and most people still there do, is not that you're trying to benefit cable operators over satellite TV operators, but you're trying to make sure that they put out different kinds of services into the marketplace that compete on things other than the costs of government regulations. Make that as equal as possible and let them start to compete on the basis of service quality and range of choices and all that other kind of stuff that actually serves consumers better. The other part of your question deals with something that the Commission still cares about, and in fact it's been very active in the last few years, which is to try to make sure that everybody's on board with broadband, including people in rural areas, including people in poor urban neighborhoods, including some of the elderly and other folks who don't necessarily believe they need it. So one of the things that the Commission is doing very actively right now, and in fact, if you looked at communications trade industry publications, you'll see lots of headlines in the next few weeks, is to take their universal service support funds, and which were set up back in the 1990s to subsidize voice services, traditional telephone service, for people who would be high cost otherwise because they're out in rural America and it's really expensive to run a line for miles to get to one house as opposed to suburbia or a city, or for people who are low income and have a difficult time paying the full freight. That system of subsidies is transferring now to broadband. So the Commission has taken its time because it's complicated, but it's about to pull money not only from traditional telephone service stuff, which probably very few of us are actually subscribers to anymore, and make everybody who is subscribing to broadband, arguably, pay a little bit extra so that they can subsidize the need to get broadband connections out in rural America or to homes in the inner city. So it's two different things, but I get the point that what you're sort of looking for is a level playing field of access for consumers, the latter thing we just talked about, and then a level playing field between service providers so that you can use competition to make sure that the best stuff comes to market without the government deciding what's good or bad. Doesn't mean that every competitor is going to do well. Some of them will probably fail, but that's fine. That's the way the market works, and that's the way that usually if there's enough competition, you can get some good stuff that people will really want brought to market.
I was going to say yes, so. Yes, Ryan?
So just in regards to the linear streaming channel definition and transmission tab, didn't the 96 Act speak, you put it out there, what a channel is.
Mm-hmm.
So how is the FCC trying to go around that if it's already been spoken to?
The FCC is taking more of, not a textualist approach, but a more legislative history, kind of looking at what Congress was meaning to do with this definition. And they found it hard to believe that they were writing this definition to exclude all the other possibilities. So they're taking channel to mean more of this everyday term, which, you know, they can't define it in every single aspect. So in this way, they're kind of going outside their box and saying that the congressional intent, there's no way they meant to define this one that speaks specifically to cable to apply to every other method and medium, so.
Well, and as you know, Ryan, and Sylvia knows too, there are different definitions or meanings for the word, depending upon what provision of the act that you stumble across. So heavens, when you have a big statute that was started in the 1930s and that has been amended over time, it's not true that Congress always goes back with a fine-tooth comb and makes sure that every single provision matches up neatly with the new stuff they've glommed onto it. So that's what leaves us in this interesting area of tension and argument, which for those of us who like to do communications law is actually a full employment act. And so really, there are some upsides to this.
With services like Watch ESPN or the streaming of sports games, that you have to have a cable subscription or satellite subscription in order to watch. Can you think of any reason why they haven't sort of jumped the bridge and gone to something like the HBO or the CBS, where they're only offering their programming for a small subscription?
So everybody out in the marketplace right now is trying to figure out what people really want. And it's been an interesting time of dynamic creative tension, change, whatever, upheaval. Creative destruction is an overused phrase, but that's part of what's going on. You know, the bottom line obvious answer is they have different business visions for what might work. And it's not clear yet, for sure, what's going to work. And maybe the answer is all these things are going to work. And there's just going to be a lot more choice for how much you pay and what you get for what you pay. The coupling the access via an app to a cable or satellite TV subscription model is designed to, among other things, not completely disrupt, not completely undercut the business model that has delivered multiple channels of programming to people for the last 30 years. So when I was a little kid in the 1960s in Iowa, broadcasting was the only game in town, and I was in a smaller state, so that meant 3 channels, that was it. Cable sort of came into being, at least from a consumer perspective, in the 1970s, really didn't start to add channels of its own, not just retransmitting broadcast channels, but channels of its own until later in that decade and into the 80s is when things started to really take off. There is a whole industry model for all the big companies, and the small ones too, as to how people get paid within that stream, how your subscription fee goes to support that, and also how your subscription fee proves to advertisers that they at least have an opportunity to get to you. And so the cable operators, the satellite TV operators, whoever, can charge advertisers, so they have a dual revenue stream. And so trying to thread their way through the new world, but not do it in a way that means they have no income at the end of the day, is I think what people are struggling with.
So I think of this, I'm also from Iowa, by the way, you can talk afterwards. I think in parallel with landlines, as Marshall mentioned, and with broadcast television, as you do, which I realize is going to trip me up lots of times when I'm trying to think about all this. But part of what I think, the way I think of it is there's the intellectual property that's being created, and so the creative people have to be paid. And then there's the vehicle of delivery. So for music, it was an LP for a long time, and then it's a CD, and now it's the internet.
Right.
And those people have to be paid. I mean, somebody has to pay the guy who digs the ditch to put the internet cable into it, et cetera. And we now know that a lot of these companies are buying each other, right? So there's companies that own intellectual property, there's companies that own the physical mechanism to channel to get it to you, whatever that is, et cetera. How does the interaction of, I guess what I would think of as the antitrust issue, the competition issue for both the intellectual property and then the medium of delivery interact with the FCC's regulation of mediums of delivery and...
It's a huge part of what they do, although they aren't the Copyright Office, so they aren't the ones that are adjudicating disputes about whether somebody's violated somebody else's copyright. You get to go to court to do that. You get to go to the copyright registrar to make sure you've got some right to uphold in the first place. But the commission a big part of what the commission does is review mergers of all sizes. And one of the big ones they have in front of them right now involves Charter, a cable company, taking over Time Warner Cable, an even bigger cable company, and another company called Bright House Networks, which is a smaller cable company. The FCC, in its review, does look at competition issues. They do kind of it used to be sort of a junior antitrust analysis, and that's kind of graduated to maybe they're the freshman and sophomore in college kind of antitrust analysis. At the same time that they're also looking at how this sits next to whatever existing FCC rules there are, what the statute says. There may be some combinations that are problematic because there have been barriers put into statutes, most of which are lifted now, but there's still a few. And then kind of they get this nice public interest policy thing too, which gives them lots of opportunity for doing good or doing mischief, depending upon how you look at things. And so what's going to come out of the Charter, Time Warner, Bright House merger proposal, probably later this month or early in April, probably will be a grant, an okay from the FCC for those companies to come forward, but they will do so with a number of conditions imposed upon them, some of which will deal with competitive issues. So for example, the companies involved, they're smart, they've been around for a while, they know how this works at the FCC. They've already volunteered to adhere to the net neutrality rules that the commission adopted a year ago, even though it's in court now, even though there's a chance that those rules may be cut back on, if not underdone altogether. The merging companies are promising to adhere to it for at least 3 years. Chances are they'll end up agreeing at the end to more years, is my guess, based on what's happened in past mergers reviews. But at the same time, the commission's doing that and doing merger review, antitrust analysis of its own. Big deals like that are also being reviewed either by the Department of Justice's Antitrust Division or by the Federal Trade Commission's Competition Division. So companies in the communication space have argued for years that this is duplicative, that the FCC shouldn't pretend to be an antitrust expert and should stay out of this game. One of the reasons that they're not getting out of the game and why the antitrust authorities, at least under Democratic administrations, are fine with that, is that because of the way the law works and what the antitrust experts can do, they can only go to court. The FCC can impose conditions before they give you an okay. Real easy to do that and real hard to challenge those conditions if you accept the grant, so.
Well, I think we're going to have to end there. Again, thanks to Rosemary Harold for coming, to Molly for her presentation. Molly, like last time, we didn't have the gift engraved. This time yours is stuck on a UPS truck. So, but please take a sandwich with our members. Thank you all for coming, and next time we'll have one more of these in 2 weeks. So we'll send out the notice soon, and look forward to seeing you there. Thank you.
Good.
Thank you.
Oh, sure, it was fun. It was good.